Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. Our guests, I know about his works. I believe we interviewed him maybe 40 years ago, if that's possible. Rabbi Michael Strassfeld grew up in a modern Orthodox Jewish home. He has written the first, second, and third Jewish catalog, which was very popular. I believe they sold over 300,000 copies. He's written other books, but his latest book is called Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So why is this, the Judaism Disrupted, as opposed to the fourth Jewish catalog?
Because, in some ways, I think I keep on writing the same book, except I'm different and the time we live in is different. And the catalog was really about how to observe Judaism, how to practice Judaism. We gave very specific directions and made it accessible in that way. I think for a lot of people now, the question is why? Why be engaged in Judaism? I actually even thought about calling the book Judaism, Why Bother? But I thought it would be a catchy title, but it was a little too obnoxious.
So people are, well, according to the latest surveys, and I think after the COVID crisis, and if I remember, they did a study after the 1918, also when they had a pandemic, where people become hedonistic, they become less involved in religion right after you have a pandemic. And I believe the trends are probably the same today. So I think people, unfortunately, are less interested in organized religion or religion in general.
Well, I think that it's across the board in religions in America that there are fewer people that are affiliated with synagogues or churches. They're an increasing group that define themselves as nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that is none of the above. They're really not that interested. And though some of those people define themselves as they're interested in spirituality, but they're just not they're not interested in religion, in the structure and the clergy and the rules and the dogma that they, at least in their eyes, goes along with religion.
Except what's interesting, except in the Orthodox community, that's growing, and people like that structure, because at the end of the day, people need a structure, because if you don't have a structure, you have it falling apart after a generation or two. Look at the conservative movement today. It's falling apart, either people becoming Orthodox or Reform.
And clearly, right. So clearly, Orthodoxy is growing, and but I was just reading some interesting statistics that evangelical churches, which seem to be the parallel phenomenon in the Christian world, are beginning to decline. So I think you see both that. Some people feel very called by traditional religion, and you can imagine that's a response to the disruptive times. Disruption is very unsettling, and traditional religions in some ways convey, well, we know, we have our beliefs, we know what's necessary, we have structure, as you said, and that can be really reassuring when in lots of other ways the world seems to be shifting underneath people's feet. But then there's the liberal community, and for them the traditional answers aren't the answers that appeal or they're looking for, and I think there is in this time of change and upheaval that people are looking for meaning, for guidance, but they look at religion and think that's not the place for it. That's old stuff. That's rote ritual. Doesn't have meaning. It's really not for me, as it were.
Well, but liberal Judaism is focusing on tikkun olam, social justice, all different kinds of, community work, not necessarily Jewish work. In fact, that Rabbi Almil Hirsch, when he was on this program, we had this whole conversation, is that you can't sustain a religion just based on social justice and tikkun olam. You have to have meat. What comes first is the Jewish content. And he was looking more at helping everybody. But at the end of the day, you got to start with your own people. And that's how you're going to sustain Judaism. If you're going to just be involved in every other cause except the Jewish cause, I think it's not good for the religion, not good for the people.
Well, I wouldn't want to underemphasize the importance of social justice and being involved in that. But
I'm not saying we should be, but you have to also include, you see a lot of times in liberal Judaism, they have soup kitchens for everybody and take care of the homeless, but they don't concentrate on all the Jewish community. They tend to focus on the more universal. What I'm saying, if you do social justice, is wonderful, but you have to also include the Jewish component as part of that. That's the starting point. And that's missing in a lot of cases.
I partly agree. I think that the critique isn't completely accurate. In other words, I think it isn't only social justice that is, that's the heart of liberal Judaism, and everything else is just minor. But I would agree with you that for Judaism, or any religion, but we're talking about Judaism, for Judaism to be meaningful, it has to feel that it helps people live lives of meaning and purpose, and that the practices of Judaism enrich a person's life. And I think what Judaism is really about is not being good Jews, but being good people, but good people through the teachings and the wisdom and the practices of Judaism. And that's and I think part of the problem is that there are lots of people, particularly people who are on the margins of the Jewish community, feel like, well, I went to synagogue, I didn't understand the prayers, I then read them in English, and I still didn't find them as, meaningful or addressing the needs in my life. So I'm suggesting that I think ritual is particularly challenging, because the flip side of the social justice is nobody says love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that doesn't make any sense. No, everybody thinks that's a great principle. But I think particularly ritual is seen as can be really meaningless and rote. And so it's how to take ritual and see it as an awareness practice, as trying to get us to pay attention to the cultivating the spiritual qualities and the personal qualities that we want to have, whether it's generosity, whether it's satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera.
As we're talking, one of the reasons why you're seeing less people going to synagogue is because COVID has trained people to go onto Zoom. And if you're going to go on Zoom, I don't have to go to the conservative or reform synagogue that's in my neighborhood. I can go to anywhere and watch anywhere in the world, basically speaking. So you have less people going in the liberal communities to synagogue. They can watch it on Zoom and have popcorn and do whatever they're doing, and they become more disconnected because of that. So it's not even a question necessarily of ritual. It's a question, even those that go to synagogue, of now zoomed in or zoomed out, depending how you want to look at it.
Right. Look, if I could, just give you like one example of what I'm talking about, I think it might be helpful. Many Jews, most Jews have a mezuzah, have on their doorpost a little object which has a scroll in it, and I think for many people, after they hang it up, it's on their door, and as I say, even most liberal Jews have it, but it becomes like wallpaper, like other things that are in your house that you just are in the background, and you don't pay attention to it. And one of the things I suggest in my book is to change the traditional practice that some people have of kissing the mezuzah every time they go from one room to another, to take a moment to kiss the mezuzah or just be aware of it as you leave in the morning, as you make a transition from your home to work, and to say that I want to take that moment and recognize that I'm making this transition and take with me what I would call a spiritual orientation to the day, which is, I just want to be thankful that I have another day in my life, or I want to be on the lookout for good things that happen and recognize them rather than miss them because I'm rushing to work, or even to say, look, I know I have a difficult meeting coming up today, and I want to carry an extra amount of patience with me into this day and into that meeting, so that this moment of transition and the mezuzah as the focus of it becomes a nice, meaningful ritual moment to orient your day, rather than something that you just don't pay attention to. You just walk by every day without even noticing. So that's the kind of awareness I'm suggesting, and whether it's using traditional rituals or reinterpreting, like them I just did with the mezuzah, as a way to make Judaism more meaningful, more related to the way you're living your life.
Well, listen, any religion or anything that you do by rote without thinking is no good. You have to put thought and work into it. It's like a relationship. You can't just take it for granted. So, but that's important. Our guest is Rabbi Michael Strassfeld. He's the editor of the Jewish Catalog. They had 300,000 copies sold. Now his book is called Judaism Disrupted, a Spiritual Manifesto for the 21st Century. Let me ask you, in your book, you write, intermarriage is a sign of our time, not the problem of our time. What do you mean by that? Because as a traditional Jew, intermarriage, assimilation, acculturation is the major problem that we have in the Jewish community today.
Look, I think this is the place where we probably don't fully agree. I think we live in a very different world than the world of the Middle Ages and the modern world, and that's part of the challenge. And I think we have broadly embraced the modern world. We would rather live in this world rather than in a world of living in a ghetto, or living where we're not allowed to, we have a limited range of professions that are open to Jews, which was the story in the Middle Ages. And I think we need to fully engage in that world. We live in an open society. And I think increasingly, and as you say, there lots of people who think this is a big problem, a serious danger to the Jewish community. I think that, given the intermarriage rates in the liberal community, which are very high, that increasingly the outside world is in our families. That more and more Jewish families have members of that family who are not Jewish, and
it means they're not living a Jewish life. That's really
the statistics actually have shifted. Originally, like 10 years ago, the intermarried, the families, the number of kids that were being raised with identifying Jewish was diminishing. Now it's the opposite. It's a more complex.
It's more
we live in a more complex world.
Doesn't just mean I kissed the mezuzah. It means being Jewish and having a Jewish lifestyle. And what you're saying about the ghetto, look, today we live in a world where even the most Hasidic Jews are part of the mainstream. Rabbi Zev Brenner, a Chabad rabbi, is a movie star. He stars in movies. And I can show you other cases where they're involved in political life. And you have so many different Jews that are traditional, religious, that pull part of the fabric of American society. So it's not a contradiction. It's not Europe where, you had to be in the ghetto.
Yeah, look, there's a spectrum of this, but in some ways, the Haredi world sees modernity as a danger, and tries to limit it the interaction as much as possible. And then there are modern Orthodox,
Which is, you grew up unorthodox, right?
right?
So,
By that name alone is saying, like, we want to say you can be Orthodox and be modern, and you're not compromising on either. So there certainly is a spectrum of ways of relationship. My book is trying to say is that for liberal Judaism to thrive or continue, Judaism has to be a much more important piece of people's identity and people's practice, and I think there we probably are in agreement. And I think that necessary for that is to take Jewish practice and reinvigorate it, reimagine it. And again, I don't want to overemphasize that mezuzah thing, but I think a lot of people who I've spoken to find that, oh, well, that's interesting. I never thought of that. And, oh, I like doing that. And it's a simple thing that I can do, but yet it actually makes a difference. It doesn't change my whole life. The book is about that and lots of other kinds of things like that, saying that, in fact, there is a lot of value in Judaism. And I think for too many people, they don't see that. They don't experience it.
And the reason why they don't experience it because they don't have a Jewish education. The part of the other equation here is that those that go to a yeshiva, day school, Salman Schechter, Reform Temple School, go even to some of the summer camps, will have a stronger Jewish identity than those that are none of the above, that have no exposure. So maybe they go to a Passover Seder. Maybe that, and I think 90% of American Jews go to some sort of Seder, and maybe they go Rosh Hashanah, maybe they fast Yom Kippur. I'm not sure about that. The Seder, I think it's more popular, but that's where the problem lies. If we want to have more committed Jews, we need more education.
And I think the way to get at that is for people to experience Judaism as meaningful and of value. And then they'll be interested in finding out more. And then it builds on itself. In other words, if you go to someone's house and they do something, and you say, well, that's really nice, then maybe I want to do that, and then maybe I make a decision that I want to send my kids to a Jewish summer camp, as you say, an overnight camp, which, is an experience that has a real impact.
Camp Ramab at some point was more successful than other means in the conservative movement for getting people to be identified. Now, today, the conservative movement is imploding. I think Chabad is probably the biggest challenger with their centers to reform and conservative Judaism because they're getting people that ordinarily would go to a conservative reform temple.
Look, we live in challenging times, right? And
no question about that.
And I think each of the parts of Judaism, whether it's Chabad or modern Orthodox Reform, have challenges, and they're different challenges, right? And each group needs to meet those challenges, and they'll do that in different ways. And the real truth is that only time will tell which elements in the Jewish community are the ones that will be here in 100 years. But in the meantime, we have to try our best.
We have to try our best. But by the way, in the generations, there was a period of time in the 1950s when conservative Judaism was the dominant movement. You had the Reform movement was big. That's changed because you're seeing people who are more committed to living more Jewish lifestyles are able to continue that for the next generations. The other movements have not had the same success and same luck. Let's be honest. That's
why I wrote the book. That Judaism Disrupted means we're living in disruptive times, but we also have to disrupt Judaism. And I'm advocating for emphasizing, meaning and practice. And practice, I mean, like spiritual practices like meditation. Using that language, I'm not specifically advocating meditation, but to take on a practice means to do it on a regular basis. If you go to synagogue 3 times a year, if you go to the gym, lahavdil, if you go to the gym 3 times a year, you're not going to get any benefit from it. You're not going to learn to play the piano if you practice 3 times a year. If things are going to be meaningful and have impact on you, you have to do it in a regular way. And I'm advocating for re-envisioning, retaking some traditional Jewish practices that the Orthodox community doesn't do anymore, and connecting them with values that I think people can find meaning and say, this is important to me to do this. I have this, I now have I'm making this up, I now have a practice that encourages me to be a more generous person, right? And I want to be that person. Or I have a practice that's going to help me stop getting angry easily and saying things that I really regret saying. And whether it's that, or whether it's what I would call the practice of high holidays, which is just high holidays is all about tshuva, about change and repentance. We should be saying, I'm sorry all the time, but we do it once a year in an intense way. And I think that is what the Jewish holidays are about, to get us to focus on an important activity, whether it's freedom on Passover, or food on Passover, or repentance, or change, or a practice of Shabbat, which is about changing from the regular 6-day a week. And whether that's a completely traditional halakhic practice, or it's saying, now there are people who say, their practice is that they disconnect electronically, from emails, cell phones, not because of traditional halakhic reasons, but because that's a way to change from the world that has caught us up to such a great degree. And I think let's try lots of different things. I'm clearly not a traditionalist in that way, that there's only one correct way to do this.
Well, the 70 facets to Torah Judaism.
Right. Yes, but that there is, it's not, I'm clearly not bounded by halakha. And I admit that's not where I am. But I think part of it, look, I grew up in the modern Orthodox world. I grew up in, going to Maimonides, going to day school.
That's in Boston.
Right. So I'm deeply rooted in the tradition. I believe, just as I think you do, that there is a lot there. And what I've been doing, and that started with the catalog and continues with this book, is trying to translate and make accessible the riches that are there. I believe that's not just translating it into English, but trying to say, I think we need to change some of these things and some of the practices, because we live in a different world and people are looking for a different aspect or a different framework. So I'm willing to make those changes. But it's all to deepen people's understanding and experience of Judaism. And my hope is that the more they feel that there is value and meaning there, the more they'll be involved, and the deeper that connection will be, and the bigger ramification it will have in their lives.
Rabbi Michael Strassfeld is our guest. His new book is called Judaism Disrupted, a Spiritual Manifesto for the 21st Century. So you mentioned before that you picked up rituals that the Orthodox have discarded. What rituals were you referring to?
There's a practice. There's in the Siddur, in the prayer book, after the morning service, there's a list of 6 things we're supposed to remember. The Sheish Zechirot, quoting biblical verses, and it's not part of the standard liturgy. So, people could say it. I would guess many Orthodox school Jews never say it because it's after the Matbeya, the set part of the. So I suggest that they're creating a morning practice that could consist of reciting Modeh, which is a traditional thank you for another day. Or I said, well, what if you use the model of these 6 things to remember, which are remember Sinai, remember the Exodus from Egypt, remember Amalek, etc. Mostly remember the Sabbath, mostly, prominent things. It's that what are the principles that I want to live my life by? And say, like, I should, at the start of each day, I should just give expression to that. That these are whether it's 6 or 4 or 5, it doesn't matter, because I want to have that kavanah. I want to carry that intention into the day with me. And so whether it's I want to remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt, and that's how I should relate to people in need, or whether it is I want to be appreciative of the wonders of creation, the wonders of this world God created. I don't want to take it for granted. So that becomes like your own little practice.
Listen, I think it's a nice thing, but why not they don't do the Shema, the Hero Israel? That's even incorporates Egypt and keeping the commandments, and that's the universal Jewish prayer that I think almost everybody can relate to. So I'm just throwing that out.
That could be. I'm just offering a wide variety, and I don't. And someone could say that that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to say the Shema, or that line itself, just Hero Israel, and that's my covenant, because I really want to be saying I am going to try and listen and hear, right, the voice of Sinai, which according to the tradition calls every day, and you could do all the mitzvot and not hear that, all the commandments, and not really paying attention to the voice.
Now, what are some of the other practices that you encourage people to do? You mentioned about being a good person. That's a universal thing. I'm looking more for a Jewish thing. But being ethical and honest is, of course, a Jewish and universal. But I'm thinking something that makes people more connected to Judaism. If you give them a universal value, it doesn't necessarily connect them to Judaism.
Well, but I'm using both. I'm using Jewish language or verses, or like the mezuzah, right? That's a perfect example, right? And the way I was talking about the holidays. So, for instance, I think one way to understand Sukkot, the fall holiday, is that it's really about the environment. It's really about nature and the world, and you could focus it on environment. And so one of the things I talk about is, what if you took the week of Sukkot and you tried to live more with as little effect on the environment as possible? So what if your practice was for the week of Sukkot? I'm not talking about on Yom Tov and festivals, but during the week, during Chol Hamoed, you wouldn't drive your car to work. You would take public transportation, and just that would be your practice. And I suggest a few other things around that. So I'm taking Sukkot. This is an example for you, right? It's a traditional holiday. I don't think it's a distortion to see it as about the environment. I think that's there within it. That's why we go out, we eat outside, and the sukkah doesn't have a roof that protects us from rain, right? So it's to connect us to the world, but gives it its own kavanah, and then translate that into practice. Don't just like, okay, I'm thinking environment, but I'm going to do some things differently. And it's not because I think that I'm now going to I just saved the planet because I didn't drive to work, 2 days a week. But a lot of things in Jewish tradition is you do this as a recognition of what we're striving to be, right? We don't live in a perfect world, but we try sometimes to live closer to that. So that's what, in some ways, what Shabbat is it is a taste of the world to come. But we don't live in the world to come. we don't try to live in the world, but we take moments, and the tradition is pointing us to reminding us this is the ultimate goal. This is what we really want the world to be. We don't live in a perfect world, far from it. But that doesn't mean that we don't try and hold those ideals as ideals that are the things we want to strive for.
So what do you do? What do you do for Shavuos, the giving of the Torah? What do you do for that?
Well, yeah, that is, I think there.
Most Jews don't know what Shavuos is. They know Pesach, maybe they know Sukkot.
I think there, for me, study is really a spiritual practice. It isn't just an intellectual practice. It isn't just like, oh, let me learn, what I need to know to follow the tradition. It's engaging in the study of Torah. It's engaging in spirituality. And for me, what happens at its best is I'm bringing myself, my own shtick, as it were, my own thoughts, my own struggles into the text, and I'm also trying to read out of the text to get some insight and wisdom from the text. And there's that conversation, the 3,000-year-old conversation of the Jewish people about what these texts mean and how do I understand them and how do I read into them and how do their reading them change how I see the world.
Now, how does Jewish food fit in? I would dare say that having authentic Jewish food may bring people back. It's my theory that the more liberal the congregation, the more dairy, the less meat, the kiddush. So you go to Haredi, you have the wonderful kiddush and cholent. I asked a Reform author of a book on Jewish cooking. She never heard of cholent. So maybe cholent, urging people to have some authentic kosher Jewish dishes might be a way of getting them through their stomach. Jews love eating.
Look, there is a folk peoplehood ethnic piece to this, right? That's part, I think, of modernity. But again, I think a place that we both probably agree is that religion, spirituality, whatever words you want to put to it, that there's something more than just culture that is an essential part of Judaism and Jewish life. And particularly in America, I think it's very challenging to be a cultural Jew. I think if in Israel, it's possible because you're speaking Hebrew, the holidays are the Jewish holidays, you read the Bible, right? So you have a thick Jewish culture, even if you never go to synagogue, you're not at all religious. But in America, we speak English. The culture is American culture, and it's much, much harder. There are plenty of cultural Jews who disagree with me, but I do think it's an aspect of Jewish life, both the food, both music, both culture, books, all those things, and it's all about having a rich Jewish existence.
No question. A rich Jewish experience is important, but I think also it has to be more traditional if it's going to be effective and long lasting. So somebody who's going to maybe kiss the mezuzah and not do anything else, the chance of his kids or grandchildren are going to have a Jewish lifestyle are remote. But if they has a more authentic Jewish experience, the chances are greater that they're going to have that Jewish continuity.
Yeah. So we disagree in the sense that because you keep on emphasizing traditional and authentic. I think that we agree that I think it has to be meaningful experiences and not just one meaningful experience.
Right, there has to be a lot, a lot more.
And I think that new experiences, will gain authenticity over time, even if they weren't 3,000 years old. And those are places we disagree. But I'm that's what the book is about, is sending out a whole bunch of different ideas and practices.
Nothing wrong with doing other things, but it has to be together. It can't just be, in my opinion, it can't just be isolationist where I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do Tikkun Olam, I'm going to do Kiss the Mezuzah, do other things. It has to be also some more Jewishly things.
Well, I'm saying it's all, for me, it's all Jewishly, right? Okay. So social justice, I'm looking at what I see as principles that come out of the tradition.
When you do social justice, do you do social justice for Jewish poor people? Is it just for poor people in general? Is it to help African Americans? Do you help Russian Jews who are struggling? No, what's the social justice? What is the component?
I think it's helping everybody, right? And obviously, you can't do everything. You're always making choices. Right. So
it has to be done. See, but let me give that an example, Robert, is that if you're doing social justice and you're having a soup kitchen and you're not serving Jews or you're not helping Jews, but you're only helping everybody else. So it's great social justice, important to do. But what about our people? If you want to have social justice, it has to be a Jewish component.
So, sorry, because
no. What I said was, if you so wonderful, but if it's only helping other people, not helping your own, it's missing. It's missing a Jewish component. As much as we want to help people, but there has to be that Jewish component, a strong one.
I understand, but part of the Jewish component, and again, I'm not sure we agree here, is a sense of out of the Jewish tradition, right? So if we're supposed to help the stranger, right? Because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. I don't think there's any way to read that verse as that means we're supposed to help strange Jews. I don't mean weird Jews. I mean Jews that are strangers to us.
Help the stranger, but don't help your own. You say listen. You're a learned person. If you have helping a poor person, the first people you help are the people of your city before you help people elsewhere. So help the stranger, but help your relative.
All I'm saying is that verse, which is the most repeated commandment in the Torah, according to the Talmud, it's 36 times, right? Is talking about people who are not us. And it puts that center there. Now that there are challenges and you can't do everything. And even if you wanted to only work on the environment, or you only wanted to work on hunger, or you only wanted to, whatever it is, there are a million things to do, and you're always making choices.
Right. To make the choice, but also there should be, what I'm saying, a stronger Jewish component. You want them to be committed Jews. If they know they're doing social justice, they have to know it's certain. If they're doing 10 hours of regular social justice, let them do 1 hour Jewish social justice. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. We disagree a lot, but
right. Am I saying, doesn't it make sense? Do your 9 hours of help.
I'm just, bottom line is, I think we're always making choices. We're always making priority, right? And even if, the traditions, as you just referred to, your neighbor takes precedence over people farther away and people in other countries. And then there's a question, well, does people in Israel take precedence over your neighbor, right? Even your Jewish neighbor. And there's debates about that, even within the tradition.
Sure. But I'm saying to you is, if you're doing, you don't have to go very far. If you're helping poor people and you live in especially areas like New York or Boston or LA, you don't have to go very far to find Jewish poor, for example. In fact, in New York, after Blacks and Hispanics, the largest group of Jewish poverty individuals are Jews. So you want to help your non-Jew, Gesundheit, do so, but don't forget there has to be a Jewish component. If you're going to give money to those groups, also make sure they give to the Jewish groups. That's what I'm saying, to the Jewish individuals. Right. And and that's social justice too.
And you could say, maybe the people who are only giving to Jews should give some money to non-Jews.
And the Orthodox, they helped in Haiti with the earthquake. The Haredi community was very supportive. I'll show you lots of other instances where they made it a point, and it didn't get a lot of media attention, but I know for sure because I spoke to the individuals.
All right.
Masbia, it's Jewish soup kitchen, helps everybody.
Yes, I know Masbia, does, but I think there are plenty of places, in the Haredi world that would never think of donating to.
So no, so that should change, and it's changing, because I can tell you an example which you may not be aware of. So we should do more, but also the liberal Jews who are doing the social justice for everybody but their own people should also add that Jewish component. I'll admit, Haredi should give more to non-Jewish cause, but the liberal Jews should also aid more to Jewish cause than to Jewish people, not just help everybody else. We agree?
We agree. I think there's less of we only give the liberal Jews who give only to non-Jews, but there certainly is an element to that. And some of that has to do with, again, like how related they feel to the Jewish community. So if they feel very unrelated, then,
but that's part of the sensitivity training.
Right. But that's
exactly what.
The bottom line, we agree. We may not disagree on how to get there. My point is to create a vibrant and meaningful liberal Judaism. Because otherwise people will feel, disconnected. And why should I give to a Jewish cause when I can give to wonderful cultural institutions in the city of New York, right?
Anyway, our conversation is going to be disrupted because we're running out of time. So Rabbi Michael Strassfeld, he's originally published a Jewish catalog, 300,000 copies sold. His latest book is called Judaism Disrupted, a Spiritual Manifest for the 21st Century. Thank you for joining us, and I hope your next piece will have more of some of the things that we've spoken about, but I appreciate you being here with us.
Right. Well, you should read my book. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Zev.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Anyway, thank you. By the way, we had this